Okay, so welcome everyone to lecture 8 of the Ecological Economics course. In the previous lecture, we examined the economy as a subsystem of the larger ecological system and explored the implications of biophysical limits, sustainability, and also the role of natural capital in supporting human well-being. We also discuss how conventional economic approaches often focus on efficiency and growth, while ecological economics emphasizes the need to operate within ecological limits, ecological boundaries. So today's lecture, this lecture 8, shifts our focus to a fundamental question. And that question is, what are economies ultimately for? And how should society organize their resources to achieve those goals? So what does it mean? It means that, we move from understanding the ecological constraints facing society to examining the ends we seek. What is the end that we ultimately want? Means available to us to achieve those ends, and what kind of policies are required to actually connect these ends and means. So that is something. So we are going to focus a lot, as you see on the screen, on the ends and the means, meaning what is the end that society wants to achieve and how can we achieve that end, and is there a way to organize those means to achieve those end. So the lecture will also explore how ecological economics provides a framework for ordering the priorities, allocating scarce resources, and designing policies that promote sustainability, justice, and efficient resource use. We will also examine the influential contribution of Herman Daly. We have been talking about him, we have been referring to Daly, who argued that a sustainable economy must first ensure sustainable scale. If you remember, he already gave us a kind of a hierarchy, how it should be, that it should be first the scale of the economy, then the distribution of resources, and finally an efficient allocation of resources, which we had discussed in detail in our earlier lecture. So again, just quickly, a slide on recap of the lecture 7. So if you look at this slide, the economy, what we had actually discussed in our last classes and what we can capture from them is that in nutshell, the economy, now we know that economy is embedded within a larger ecosystem. Economic activities depends on throughput of energy and materials, which is constrained by ecological limits, something which I explained to you what is a throughput of energy and material. The law of thermodynamics, which implied that unlimited growth on a finite planet is impossible. We also discussed about, or we distinguished between scale, distribution, and allocation. And we also had a discussion on how we have moved from an empty world to a full world situation. Continued growth may become, in fact, even uneconomic in a full world if we continue without recognizing the boundaries or the scale. So this basically leads us also to our today's central question, that if economic growth is not an end in itself. So if you look at the discussion that we have been having, the idea here is that while we keep on talking about economic growth, but you need to ask, is the end that we want to achieve, is it economic growth or is it something else? So what should be then the ultimate goal of the economy? If economic growth itself is not the ultimate goal, we want economic growth for certain things. So what are those certain things and how can we achieve them? What kind of policies can help us to achieve them? So that is something that we will discuss into. Now, what is important is that Herman Daly argues that economics is fundamentally about the relationship between ends, means, and ends. Okay, so as you see on the screen here, I talk about core idea, ends, and means. So today's lecture is very important in the sense that you will be able to understand that what drives the economy, what are those means that drives the economy, and how those means helps us in achieving end. So the first thing we need to understand is what is end and what are those means, right? So means are the resources we use, such as natural resources, energy, labor, technology, capital, while ends are the goals that we ultimately want to achieve or seek, such as well-being, health, security, justice, quality of life. So it is very important to recognize here is that economic growth itself is not the end. End is that through economic growth, we will be able to achieve well-being, health, security, and quality of life. So a key contribution of ecological economics is the recognition that economics should not focus only on the efficient use of means, that how efficiently we use the mean. It must also ask whether we are pursuing the right end. So, okay, we are using our means, but we need to also understand what is the end we are trying to achieve. So economic activity should not be therefore just simply by how much it produces, or but by whether it contributes to human well-being and better quality of life. This distinction may seem, it may look, it's a very simple distinction, but Daly argues that many economic debates actually arise because societies often confuse between, means such as income, growth, with ends such as well-being and happiness. So remember, income or growth actually is a mean, but what ultimately you want to achieve is actually well-being and happiness. Now, to understand that, what he introduces us to something called the ends means spectrum, as you see on the slide. So that, at the very bottom of the ultimate end, there is a diagram which will come now, is that there is something, yeah. So as you see on the diagram here, that at the very bottom of are the ultimate means. These consists actually of low entropy matter and energy provided by nature. Now, if you remember what is low entropy, we discussed something which is given to us in a natural form, which is in a very ordered form, right? For example, natural resources are known to be low entropy matter. And similar, so in other words, all economic activity ultimately depends on natural resources, energy, and the ecological systems. This is why the spectrum begins with the physical world and law of physics. So you see clearly on the diagram, it talks about physics, right? Because this is where the physical law, also the law of thermodynamics, etc., comes in, about entropy comes in, because they are all provided, or they are all given in a very low entropic form. Now, using these natural resources, what society does is it creates intermediate means. Just to let you know, we will go into further detail about what exactly is ultimate means, what exactly is intermediate means. But this, I just want to first give you an overarching picture of what exactly ends and means mean. So if you look at what is intermediate means, it is the tools, the artifacts, the technologies, infrastructure, machines, institutions. These are intermediate means that help us to achieve our goal. And so Daly refers to these as products of human ingenuity and technical knowledge. So through the ultimate means, what we do is we now want to convert that means into an end. But before we convert it into an ultimate end, there are two stages that comes in. One is this intermediate means. Again, we will discuss about this more in detail. And along with that, intermediate ends. So what is this intermediate ends? As you see in between, this intermediate ends means such as healthy, safety, comfort, all of those basically things that people generally value, right? But they are not necessarily the final purpose of life. Of course, you value health, safety, comfort, education, all of these. But Daly argues that these are not something that, I mean, we value, but this is not why we are, this is not the purpose of life. So then he goes at the final ultimate end, which is the deepest goals that societies and individuals seek. And Daly leaves this somewhat open, as different cultures, religions, and philosophies may define them differently. So they may include happiness, fulfillment, meaning, justice, spiritual development, or something called good life. So if you look at this very interestingly, what you see here is that from ultimate means to ultimate ends, in most cases, we get confused where our ultimate end is. Many a times we feel that even just having a lot of income itself is an ultimate end. But how he redefines this, and he says that ultimate end is something where you want to be happy, where you want to have a good life, where you want to have something which gives you fulfillment, a feeling of fulfillment, right? So an important feature of this figure is that different disciplines operate at different levels. Physics helps us understand the ultimate means. Engineering and technology transforms means into useful artifacts. Economics and politics helps organize resources to achieve social goals. Ethics, philosophy, and religion help societies reflect on what those ultimate goals should be. So the key message is that economics occupies only one part of this larger chain. Therefore, economics should not focus exclusively only on production, consumption, GDP, markets, etc. Because these are of course important, but they are only intermediate means or intermediate ends. The broader purpose of economics is to help transform nature's resources into genuine human well-being and ultimately contribute to the goals that society values most. So as you see on the slide, there is a sequence from nature to technology to economy to human well-being to ultimate purpose. So you can see economy actually comes in between. It's not the ultimate end. The challenge for ecological economics is to ensure that lower levels of hierarchy serve the higher levels rather than allowing means such as GDP growth or consumption to actually become the end in themselves. So what is most important here to understand that there is a hierarchy. So you can't actually say that economy is at the, at the top. That is not something that, which is what most of the time in economics we say that GDP, once you have more GDP, that's the ultimate goal that we actually want. If you look at this concept, it's a bit more philosophical, but it's very important because in the sense, this helps us to also explain to ourselves that it is so important that we are clear about the end we want to achieve. Because once we know the end that we want to achieve, then we will also follow a path which will help us to reach to that end, which is fulfillment, happiness, etc. Okay. Now, what is important to understand here is that, like as I mentioned, the ends and means spectrum helps us to understand the relationship, what we use and what we ultimately want to achieve. What is important in this slide is to understand the key principle is that lower level exists to serve higher level. So there is a level, right? So what you see here is that this means that each level is a means to the level above it and end relative to the level below it. So let me just quickly walk you through these hierarchy. So at the base, what you see is nature, which provides matter and energy required for all economic activity. Nature therefore serves as the ultimate means. Using these natural resources, we develop technology and artifacts which allow us to transform these resources into useful goods and services. That's something we always, so we invest a lot of technology so that we can make use of these ultimate means into something productive. This technology, what does it do? It then support the economy, which organizes production, exchange, distribution. What is the purpose of this, all of these production, exchange, distribution? The purpose of the economy is, again, not to simply generate output or GDP, right? But to contribute to human well-being, which is health, security, comfort, quality of life. This also is not the ultimate end, but it is an intermediate end. But once you have these, beyond well-being lies the broader question about meaning, ethics, justice, human purpose, which daily actually associates with philosophy, religion, and ethics. So the most important takeaway from this slide is that we should read the spectrum from bottom upward below, because lower levels are means and higher levels are end. So, the nature supports technology, technology supports economy, the economy supports human well-being, and then well-being should contribute to higher human values. That's the most important thing. Whether all of these that we are today doing, is it actually also increasing human value? So Daly's message is simple. Economy is not the final goal. It is a tool that should serve human well-being, which in turn should serve broader societal and ethical objectives. Right? Okay, so that's something again quite interesting, but let's just move on and let's just see what basically each of these steps now talking about. Now let's look at each of the ultimate means and then move to intermediate. So let's first look at the slide where we are talking about the ultimate means. So if the economy, for example, does not create resources from nothing, right? So it can only transform what it receives from nature. So the natural inputs are valuable because they are concentrated, organized, capable of doing useful work. And that is why we call them as low entropy resource. The idea actually comes from law of thermodynamics, which we had discussed earlier. Now, let me give you an example. So take the example of coal, right? We are all talking about a lot of coal, fossil fuel, etc. So a lump of coal contains concentrated and usable energy, making it a low entropy resource. It's very useful. It's one of the most important ultimate means that economy uses or this so that it can continue its production and distribution, right? So when coal is burned to generate electricity, the energy powers homes and industries, but the process also it releases waste, heat, carbon dioxide, ash. The original concentrated energy becomes dispersed throughout the environment and so can no longer be fully recovered. Now you cannot really convert carbon dioxide to coal again. So this is a movement from low entropy to high entropy, right? So this is a very important thing to understand, that how you use coal, you use it for your economic activities. You, of course, you use it because it was something which was at that time in an ordered and capable of doing useful work. But when you are using it, you also create certain byproducts, and these byproducts are such that they cannot be brought back or converted back to coal. They are completely very disordered, and many of them are of no use as well. So they are like very high entropy. So, this is another very simple, analogy is a neatly arranged bookshelf. Books are organized and easy to use. If the books are, scattered across the room, the same book still exists, but they are much less organized and harder to use. So entropy works in a similar way. Low entropy means concentrated and ordered resources, while high entropy means dispersed and less useful resources. And this is why ecological economists emphasize the biophysical limits. While technology can improve efficiency, it cannot eliminate the fundamental dependence of economy on nature's finite stock of useful matter and energy. So you might think of coming up with various alternatives, but some of these finite stock of useful matters and energy you will always need. An economic process will continuously transform the low entropy resources into high entropy waste. So the key message is that the economy is not independent circular flow. It is not an independent circular flow. If you remember that circular flow diagram, it explains this better. Now you can see better that where economy actually fits it. It is embedded within a larger ecological system and depends continuously on nature's capacity to produce lower entropy resources and absorb high entropy waste generated by economic activity. So the important point here is that if you create too much of high entropy waste and if you do not allow the low entropy resources to regenerate, then ultimately you will set the limits and economy probably will not be able to grow further. So this ecological foundation ultimately sets the limits within the economic activity, within which the economic activity can occur. Okay, so that was about ultimate ends. Now let's move one step up in this hierarchy, and we come to what Daly calls as intermediate means. So these are human-made, basically human-made assets, right, that help us transform nature into goods and services. They're extremely important because they increase productivity, allow societies to achieve more resources or more with the available resources. However, it is important to remember that these artifacts are not independent of nature. Every machine, factory, road, or piece of technology ultimately also originates from natural resources and requires continuous flow of energy and material to function. So, for example, consider a smartphone. We often think of it as a product of human, innovation, and it's like very big, important asset. But it depends on minerals mined from earth, energy used in manufacturing, water used in production, and also the global transportation network. So without these underlying inputs, natural inputs, the technology itself could not exist. So while the smartphone may look like something which has nothing to do with nature, but they are all connected to nature because you need energy to produce all of these, technology as well. This is why Daly distinguishes between ultimate means and intermediate means. Technology cannot become an ultimate mean because it is not a resource in itself. It cannot create resource from nothing, right? So a more efficient, for example, a more efficient fishing boat may catch more fish, but it cannot create fish stocks if ecosystem collapse. So here the fishing boat is the technology, intermediate mean, but it is not the ultimate mean because you still need fish. Similarly, like you may have better irrigation technology can improve water use efficiency, but it cannot generate fresh water in the absence of natural water systems. So again, the key insight here is that human-made capital and natural capital are complementary rather than perfect substitutes. Intermediate means expands our capabilities, but they remain dependent on the ecological foundation provided by ultimate mean. And that is why Daly places them above nature in the hierarchy, but not as the foundation. So technology is not the foundation. It is one step ahead because it also depends on the nature. This gives actually a very interesting idea of how this whole hierarchy works. Okay. Now let's move to the next case, so which is where the economy comes in, right? So having looked at the means, we now move to the other side of Daly's hierarchy, the ends that economy actively try to get, right? So what I want at this level, we find what Daly basically calls as intermediate ends. There are outcomes that people directly seek in their everyday lives: good health, education, security, mobility, decent housing, all of these opportunities for better life. This is where most economic policy is focused. Governments worry about employment, right? Income, public services, welfare programs, economic growth, because these are expected to improve these intermediate ends. But an important insight from Daly is that people do not really value money for its own sake. If I offered you ₹1 billion that could never be spent, it would have no value, right? What people really value is what money can help them achieve. Again, like better healthcare, education, housing opportunities, etc. So for example, when a student you all are pursuing a degree, the ultimate objective is usually not to just get a certificate. The degree is valuable because it may lead to knowledge, employment, better quality of life. Similarly, income is not an end in itself. It is a mean to achieve things that people really care about. So this distinction is important because modern economics often confuse this means with ends. So they consider that, GDP, income, consumption itself are the ends. But these are only useful if they actually contribute to improvement in people's well-being. And this is why Daly places economies and politics at this level. Through policies and institutions, society decides how resources are allocated, how income is distributed, how opportunities are created. So the ultimate purpose of these decisions should be to improve human well-being, not to simply increase economic activity. But also remember one thing that Daly argues, that even health, comfort, security, and income are not the highest goal. They are still instrumental because they help us pursue something deeper, the ultimate ends of human life, which is what we are going to discuss in our next slide. So, what you now see here is that at the very top of the hierarchy is what it is known as the ultimate ends, right? So this represents the deepest reason why we pursue all other goals below them. So if you think about the hierarchy we have discussed so far, we use natural resources to create technology and infrastructure. We use technology to generate goods, services, income, health, education, security. But then we must ask a deeper question. Why do we want these things in the first place? Why do we want income? Perhaps for security, right? Why do we want security? Perhaps to live a meaningful and fulfilling life. So as we keep asking why, we eventually reach a level beyond which economics can no longer provide answers. So Daly deliberately leaves this level open because different individuals, culture, society may actually define this ultimate purpose of life very differently. So for some, it may be spiritual fulfillment. For others, happiness, justice, human flourishing, service to society, anything, harmony with nature, or even religious devotion. This is why Daly argues that economics is a powerful tool, but it cannot tell us what we ought to value. Economics can help us allocate resources efficiently, but it cannot really determine whether our goals are morally desirable or whether they contribute to a good life. And this is very, very, important. If you just let me give you an example. For example, economics can tell us how to increase income, right? But it cannot really answer whether pursuing higher consumption will make us happier. Similarly, it cannot measure economic growth, but it cannot, while it can measure economic growth, but it cannot decide whether growth should take precedence over equity, community, or environmental protection. So these questions, therefore, belongs to ethics, philosophy, religion, culture, etc., because they involve values rather than markets. In other words, economics can help us choose the best means, but society must decide the ends. And that is why, if you remember the way we understand ecological economics, we always have ecology or environment, society, and economy, all of them together. You cannot only think about economy, you cannot only think about society, you cannot only think about ecology. You need to think of them as an interconnected relationship that they share. So Daly's hierarchy moves from nature at the bottom to human purpose at the top. The lower level tells us what makes economic activity possible, while the upper levels remind us why economic activity exists in the first place. Okay, now that we have examined each level separately, we can understand what these, it's important for us to understand what these vertical lines, actually represents. So it is the chain that connects nature, the economy, the human well-being, ultimately our deeper life goal, right? So the direction of dependence is important. The higher level depends on lower levels. Human well-being depends on economic activity. As I said, economic activity depends on technology and institutions, and all of these depends finally on ecosystem and natural resources. So this is from higher level to lower level. This means that economy is not self-sustained or self-contained system. As you can clearly see, it is embedded within society, and society itself is embedded within the biosphere. So if ecological foundation is weakened, the higher levels of hierarchy are eventually affected as well. So if your foundation is weak, you can never reach the higher level under hierarchy, right? So the central criticism of modern economics is that this hierarchy has been actually turned upside down. Economic growth, production, and GDP are often treated in end in themselves, and whereas the foundation is not given any importance at all, because of which we are actually achieving economic growth. So to see this difference, imagine a country whose GDP grows rapidly, but where air quality deteriorates, inequality increases, mental health declines, ecosystems are degraded. So conventional, economics or indicators may call this progress because you have, of course, a very high GDP. But Daly would ask whether the economy is still serving its intended purpose. So for Daly, the economy is not the goal; it is a tool. Just as a hammer is valuable because it helps build a house, economy is valuable because it helps society achieve well-being and meaningful human goals. When we start valuing the tool, that is the hammer, more than the purpose it serves, the house, then we lose sight of what development is really about. So this is why ecological economics shifts the central question. Instead of asking only how can we make economy bigger, it asks what is the economy for, like I had asked in the very beginning. If the purpose of the economy is to improve human well-being, then growth should be just not by its size alone, but by whether it contributes to better quality of life while remaining within ecological limits. So the ultimate lesson from this diagram is that nature provides the means, human flourishing provides the ends, and the economy exists actually in between as means of connecting the two. So if you remember, I asked this question, how do you connect means and ends? So here is the answer. Economy's role is to actually connect the means and the end that you want to finally achieve. So in this way, a successful economy is not the one that grows fastest, but the one that most effectively converts nature's resources into sustainable human well-being without undermining the ecological systems on which future well-being depends. which is also something which we call it as sustainability. Okay, so having understood this hierarchy, we can now actually appreciate the central argument. We begin, like so many of the problems facing modern societies actually arise when we confuse between this means and ends. So we begin to treat, like I said, economic growth, consumption, income, population, all of these as themselves as goal rather than as instrument for achieving a better life. What I want to bring in here is that, as you see on this slide, is that ecological economics actually helps you to reorder, to relook of what we have been always looking at. So the question that we ask is that, do we want better health, greater equity, stronger communities, environmental sustainability, improved quality of life, or we simply ask, how can we grow the economy, right? Or should we ask, what kind of society do we want? So once those goals are clearly defined, like whether we want to follow something, how can we grow the economy? Or if you say that, no, for us, that's not important. For us, what is important is what kind of society we want. Then once that goal is clearly defined, economy can be actually designed as a tool to achieve them. So the economy should serve society, and society must therefore operate within the limits of the nature. And this is why sustainability occupies such a central place in ecological economics. Future generations should have access to same ecological foundation, the ultimate means that we discussed, that supports our well-being today. If you don't have that ultimate mean, then it's not a sustainable development, because if you remove all that ultimate means, then even if you have your infrastructure, your technology, there would be nothing to generate that well-being for which you are actually working. So the essence here is that economy is not the ultimate goal of a society. It is a means for achieving human well-being within the ecological limits. So the challenge is now not how to maximize economic growth, but how to achieve this greatest possible flourishing while respecting the biological limits of a finite planet. So I hope you understood this discussion that we had today. This is important because it actually helps you to relook at most of the things that we mostly talk about from the point of view of economic growth, from the point of view of development. But today, what I wanted to tell you is that the role of economy cannot be ultimate. There are many things that is there. It's not so, but unfortunately, our vision is so narrow that we feel that what if we only flourish the economy, everything else will fall in its place. Like ultimate means will also be sustained and ultimate end will also be sustained. But that is something which is why ecological economics differ. And it says that no, economy is only one part of our larger hierarchy that we mostly follow. Okay, so I'm going to end here and we will meet in the next class. Thank you.